Okay, so if I asked you to picture, say, high society indulgence in 19th century New York, the Gilded Age, what comes to mind?
Well, probably things like lavish dinners, maybe opera boxes, those private railroad cars we hear about.
Exactly, standard rich people stuff, right. But what you probably wouldn't picture is this. Actual legal hashish parlors, lavish ones.
Uh-huh. Discreetly tucked away in Midtown Manhattan.
Yeah. Where the city's like financial and cultural movers and shakers went to chase visions.
It's an image that really flips the script on how we usually think about early drug culture in America.
Totally.
So today we're diving deep into the sources, looking at accounts, including research like New York's Gilded-Age Hashish Parlors, to sort of map out America's very first version of the curated cannabis experience.
Right, the high-end version.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And these weren't, hidden speakeasies waiting for prohibition. They were known places, operating in this kind of surprising legal gray area.
So that's our mission today. We want to get a feel for the atmosphere, the sheer luxury of it all, how it was designed for like sensory immersion.
And who was actually in these places?
Yeah, who was sitting in these opulent rooms, and critically, what caused the shift? Because it ended pretty dramatically, didn't it?
It did. There was this sudden legal and cultural change that turned these indulgent spots into targets of, well, moral panic.
Okay, so we're exploring the, let's say, brief but pretty dazzling life of these Gilded Age pleasure domes.
And maybe we should start with the aesthetics, because the look of these places, the design detail, is really crucial to understanding what they were selling.
Absolutely. When you read the descriptions, these were not just casual spots to hang out. They were meant to transport you immediately.
Yeah, like stepping into another world.
Totally. We're talking Arabian Nights decor, right?
Yeah.
Very exotic. Lots of silver filigree lamps, prismed chandeliers, everything designed to amplify the experience.
It was pure aesthetic escapism filtered through a Victorian lens. Maybe think less about just getting high and more about participating in a kind of theater.
Theater. I like that.
The sources talk about thick carpets to muffle the sound, silk-lined walls to soften the light, and the decor deliberately blurred the lines between reality and dream.
So they were consciously trying to create this bubble, yeah.
Yeah.
A complete break from the noisy industrial city right outside.
Precisely.
And the people paying for this escape. That's maybe the most surprising bit in the historical record, isn't it?
It really is.
Because we tend to associate substances like hashish, especially back then, with maybe marginalized groups or, underground scenes.
Right. But these parlors, initially at least, were destinations for New York's absolute elite.
Seriously, like the top tier.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Harper's Magazine, reporting back in 1883, actually described one parlor where an upper room was specifically, quote, reserved for persons, chiefly ladies.
Ladies. Wow. Okay.
So this was integrated, maybe discreetly, but integrated into the social lives of the wealthy. They weren't really hiding from the law so much as maybe hiding from social gossip.
Protected by the sheer fanciness of the place, maybe.
Probably. And the opulence itself was part of the protection.
Still, it's kind of hard to picture bankers and debutantes openly doing this. Was the press just not interested at first, or was it hidden?
Well, initially there seems to have been this sort of romantic curiosity about it. It was tied up with ideas of exotic travel and literature, which we can get into.
Okay.
But the decor definitely helped shield them. They used things like twirling smoke, lots of mirrors, soft drapery. Some accounts even mention bizarre stuff like dragon fixture.
Dragon fixtures. Okay.
Yeah, trying to achieve what we might now call a kind of Victorian psychedelic vibe. The setting itself was meant to maximize the potential of the product. The aesthetics were part of the high.
So the setting was designed for this specific elevated experience. What were they actually serving then? It wasn't just like basic stuff, was it?
No, not at all. This elite clientele, they demanded specific, high-quality, potent experiences. The menus, so to speak, listed these highly sought-after imports, things like Nepaul resin and Gunjeh.
Okay, for anyone listening who isn't familiar, Nepaul resin, Gunjeh.
Yeah.
Can you give us a quick sense of the potency there?
Sure. Nepaul resin generally meant a really strong form of hashish, often imported from Nepal, known for its deep, sort of dreamlike effects. Very potent.
Right.
And Gunjeh, that typically referred to the strongest cannabis flower or maybe compressed buds available at the time. Again, these weren't weak preparations.
No mild buzzes here.
Definitely not. They were designed to induce a strong, visionary, maybe even disorienting high, tailored for people actively seeking, imaginative journeys.
And how were they consuming it?
Methods varied. You had things like lozenges, resin-infused sweets, but also smoking, often through these really elaborate water pipes called goza pipes.
Okay. Now, this is where the story takes a bit of a darker turn, based on the sources, right? Because it seems these potent compounds weren't always the whole story.
That's true.
Wait, so they were sometimes mixing in other substances, like opium, datura, is that right?
Yes, sometimes.
Yeah.
And that dramatically changes the risk profile, obviously.
Yeah, no kidding.
While the main event was hashish, some places, maybe trying to enhance the visionary effects or even cater to existing addictions, apparently layered in these really powerful, dangerous narcotics.
Wow.
We see mentions in some accounts of blends containing opium, datura, even henbane. These were not gentle experiences they were chasing.
So they were pursuing these intense visionary cocktails, potentially really dangerous ones, even within these beautiful plush settings.
Exactly. It really shifts the motivation from just relaxation to something more like a pursuit of extreme altered states.
And this wasn't just happening randomly, was it? There was a kind of intellectual or artistic justification behind it.
Precisely. It wasn't happening in a cultural vacuum. Many patrons, especially the writers and artists among them, were kind of chasing this literary ideal.
An ideal from where?
They were heavily influenced by this book from 1857, Fitzhugh Ludlow's The Hashish Eater. It was quite famous.
Ah, okay. I've heard of that one.
Ludlow really romanticized the experience, calling hashish a portal to imagination. So these patrons weren't just, getting stoned. They saw it as a tool for creative work.
Huh.
And they leaned into it, sometimes adopting this whole Orientalist persona,
Yes.
sipping things like coca tea, maybe even wearing specific attire.
Right. So the high society crowd is performing this kind of artistic ritual while chasing down specific imports like Nepaul resin. It sounds strikingly familiar, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, like contemporary cannabis connoisseurship.
Yeah.
People seeking out specific rare strains for particular effects.
Absolutely. That desire for a specific high-quality compound may be chosen for a particular psychological effect. That whole idea has its roots right here.
So this desire for pedigree, quality, specific chemical profiles, it's not new at all.
Not at all. These Victorians, in a way, were the first American cannabis connoisseurs, defining their experience by the rarity and the source of their product, just like today's market in some ways.
Okay, so we've got the scene. Lavish setting, elite clientele, potent and sometimes dangerous products, all wrapped up in this legally ambiguous indulgence. It sounds like it could have just kept going.
It does seem that way.
Yet, it got shut down relatively quickly. And the key point you mentioned earlier is the legality at the start. Federal law hadn't prohibited these things yet.
That detail is really the pivot point for the whole story, because hashish itself wasn't technically illegal. The crackdown, when it started ramping up in the 1890s, had to target the culture, not the drug itself.
Okay, wait. So if possession wasn't a crime, how did the police actually manage to shut down these fancy midtown places?
This is the crucial legal trick and a real historical insight. As moral panic grew, driven by changing social attitudes and, importantly, increasingly sensational media, the NYPD started raiding these places, these Turkish smoking parlors. But they couldn't use a drug charge. So instead, they charged the owners and operators with maintaining a disorderly house.
A disorderly house.
Yeah.
Like a brothel or an illegal gambling den charge.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
The focus shifted completely from the substance to the social environment. The perceived moral threat wasn't the hash. It was the culture being fostered inside those velvet rooms.
So they were targeted because they encouraged disorderly behavior, whatever that meant to the authorities, not because they were handing out technically illegal drugs.
Precisely. It suggests that the bigger threat in the eyes of the police and the moral crusaders wasn't just the chemical effects. It might have been the perceived breakdown of class boundaries or the sort of un-Victorian behavior happening under the influence.
They were targeting the ritual, the atmosphere, the whole scene.
Well, it's the perceived threat to public order.
And we actually know where this was happening, geographically speaking. The raids focused on a pretty tight area, didn't they?
They did. A small cluster of addresses, mostly near Broadway, 4th Avenue, West 25th Street, right there in Midtown Manhattan.
But this is also where reality seems to totally diverge from the media hype at the time.
Oh, completely. The press, especially the new tabloid papers that were starting up, they smelled a story, a scandalous one.
And they ran with it.
And then some. They basically manufactured this narrative of mass moral collapse. You see headlines bragging about hundreds of these dens, claims of 500 parlors operating across the city.
Making it sound like this was some kind of pervasive, uncontrolled epidemic threatening every New Yorker.
Exactly. A huge social vice.
But the actual verified evidence tells a much quieter story.
It really does.
Mm.
The solid contemporary records, the police reports, the verifiable accounts, they point to only a, quote, small cluster of these hashish houses really operating.
Mostly catering to that elite or bohemian crowd we talked about.
Right. Operating before the main crackdowns began. The panic was wildly inflated. It served a purpose, journalistically and probably politically,
Which was?
to generate fear, basically,
Yeah.
and to justify taking action against something that wasn't actually, strictly speaking, a crime yet.
That deliberate media exaggeration.
Mhm.
Wow. It's like a classic example of how a relatively limited thing can be blown up to create public support for future, more formal prohibition.
Absolutely. It set the stage. It established the public narrative that this practice was this enormous, uncontrollable moral danger, even though its actual footprint was pretty small.
Okay, so that brings us to the so what? Why does this short-lived phenomenon matter today if we synthesize its importance?
Well, I think these brief, intense years of the hashish parlor culture actually created a really significant blueprint
A blueprint for what?
for the modern cannabis lounge, essentially. These velvet rooms prefigured it by more than a century.
Okay, I see that.
They establish all the key components that, contemporary cannabis culture is often trying to recapture or recreate today.
Like the specific ritual, the carefully designed ambiance.
Exactly. And the whole idea of a shared kind of sophisticated elevation, a setting designed to encourage creativity, conversation.
All happening way back in the 1880s and 90s, in that legal gray zone.
Decades before the federal government finally formalized control with the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. But the idea, the concept of curated, cultured cannabis consumption, almost as an art form that was born right there in Gilded Age New York.
And the big takeaway from the sources seems to be that this 19th century mix of intentional creativity, conversation, and focused comfort, that's precisely what's driving a lot of the high-end consumer market today, isn't it?
It really is. It just proves that cannabis culture, at least in some forms, has always been just as much about the aesthetic and the social experience as it has been about, simple intoxication.
It's a pretty amazing journey when you trace it. From that high society indulgence and imported Nepaul resin.
To the crazy tabloid headlines and that initial moral panic that led to the raids based on disorderly conduct, not drug laws.
Yeah. We've kind of come full circle in realizing that the setting, the ritual, it matters just as much as the substance itself.
It absolutely does.
And that, I think, leads us to a final, maybe provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over. If the aesthetic experience and the social ritual were the very first things targeted by Prohibition, remember, they charged the parlors as disorderly houses, not for the hash itself.
What does that suggest about the perceived threat?
What was the real fear?
Right. Was the establishment more afraid of the organized culture that cannabis produced, the social mixing, the alternative thinking? Maybe more than the actual pharmacological effects of the plant itself.
That's a fascinating question to consider, especially when you look at how these things play out even today.
Definitely something to think about. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the surprisingly luxurious and ultimately pretty short-lived history of New York's Gilded Age Hashish Parlors.
Quite a story.
We hope you found some interesting new ground to explore in the very beginnings of American drug culture.